The issue for leadership is to have relationships with people. Human beings are designed, are born to be relational. And so if you want to make a difference in people's life, you got to learn how to have a relationship.
You are a warrior.
321 status.
What kind of vehicle is it?
You are the very best your nation has to offer.
911.
Multiple shots fired.
They're asking you to lead.
5. We need a Bearcat.
It's up to us.
So 133. I need somebody that's got a visual on where the shooter is.
You must be sound in mind, body, and spirit.
42, where's the officer down? I have a rescue helicopter that wants to land and help.
This is the podcast that will make you the one.
Copy, running eastbound.
The one that will bring everyone back.
Trouble, we have shots fired, shots fired. Give me back up now.
Because no one else is coming.
We're going to have an officer shot. 100 block of East Street.
Suspect is down. Suspect is down.
This is The Squad Room.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Squad Room. I'm your host, Garrett Slaw. I'm an active duty sergeant for a sheriff's department in Southern California. On this show, we help you, the modern warrior, achieve your full potential and fulfill your purpose as a first responder. The show is about being a better modern warrior. How can we be the leader this world needs us to be? And how to be the best version of ourselves possible every day. You must understand, part of the premise of the show is that you, as a first responder, are a leader. It's my firm belief that we are the absolute best our nation has to offer and that we must burden ourselves with leading others if we are to save our country. We are the nation's modern warriors. Before we get to the interview, I want to remind you that you can get more information on this episode, including show notes and links, by going to thesquadroom.net. You can also subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher if you haven't already, and follow me on Instagram and Twitter at The Squadroom. Also, please join our very growing Facebook group. Just search The Squadroom Podcast Group, and it'll pop up. And it's a closed group, so it's open only to people who listen to the show, who are interested in law enforcement or are currently in law enforcement. And we can have conversations there, and I vet all the people that join the group. It's a great place for people who are interested in law enforcement to get some advice, and for those of us with some time on to bounce ideas off of each other. My guest today for this episode, fantastic interview, author of a book called Leadership at the Front Line. His name is James Capra. James was, prior to his retirement, a DEA agent. And not just an agent, but Jimmy served as the chief of global operations for the DEA. He was responsible by the end of his career for 227 domestic offices and 86 foreign offices in 67 countries. Jimmy was at the forefront of the cocaine cartel wars in the 80s and 90s. We talk even during the show, if for those who watch the show Narcos on Netflix, he knows those guys and good friends with them and texts back and forth with them during the show as he watches. He's currently a speaker, an author. He's raised 6 successful children, some of them also in law enforcement currently. And he's got some really unique ideas on leadership. And it's unfortunate that I have to even say unique because when he was talking during this episode, he hit on a lot of the key points that I try to instill in my own methods and my own leadership. And for a guy like him, for a guy from New York City, raised as his dad was an NYPD cop, and he gets it from his dad. But this idea of being able to love the people you work with. And, you say love to a bunch of cops and they get all weirded out. But, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And we see this in our leadership so often that they are indifferent to the people that they lead. And it's really unfortunate because when we love the people we work with, we can really move mountains together. Now, in the background, you heard a bark just now. That wasn't intentional. You're going to hear a couple more throughout the episode. My dog seems to be quite uppity today. I don't know why. He's now cowering as I look at him. Anyway, there's some barking in the episode with Jim, so you'll have to excuse my Labrador puppy for not being able to control his excitement at this episode. So here's my interview with James Capra, former Chief of Global Operations for the DEA. James Capra, welcome to the Squad Room. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be on your program.
Some time ago, and this is my fault, you sent me your book, Leadership at the Front Line. And I really enjoyed it. It was actually recommended to me by a listener who's in your family, extended family, I think. And I dug right into it. It's a quick read, and it's an easy read, especially for those of us in law enforcement, because it's all about. There's a lot of cop stories in here. And you were a cop. I mean, I guess you're always a cop in some ways, right? You never shed that. But I mean, your career was in the DEA. And you retired as Chief of Operations for the DEA. Is that right?
Right. Yeah.
But I want to go back, before you got to the top offices of the DEA. I want to start with your first exposure to law enforcement, which was as the son of an NYPD officer. And I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, my dad was a Korean combat veteran, and he did a lot of things that guys in that generation did. The World War II was over, Korea broke out, and he left high school at 10th grade, joined the Army, and went off to fight in the war. Came home, and got hired by the Port Authority Police Department, and then a few years later joined the NYPD, and started on a beat in Midtown Manhattan, squad car, and then he went to motors. And during that time, of course, there was no ESU, there was no SWAT. So if you were a motor officer in New York City, that was a huge, just a huge elite group of, I used to call it crazy motor cops. And my dad, that was, as we got a little bit older, but he very early on, he broke his, coming on patrol off the Grand Central Parkway, he broke his back and neck in just a horrific accident. And he would wind up having to retire a few years later, and we went from Queens, New York, up to upstate New York, we went from crazy Queens to up in here's most of us. There's 7 of us in our family, 6 boys and a girl, and I'd never seen a cow alive. I never saw a cow before. So you go to upstate New York and you're looking out the window screaming, "Look at that!" and people think you're crazy. But my dad had a big influence in terms of when we got older and what really I wanted to pursue in my life.
So what was that experience like then for you, growing up as the son of a cop? I wonder about, I have a 6-year-old son, and I wonder about what his experience is going to be like. Yeah.
Well, you know what? Here's what I tell people all the time, because I didn't grow up listening about stories of, shoot 'em up and bad guys. The thing that was really impressive to me, and you didn't realize this. I didn't realize this until I got older, until I started pursuing, the calling in law enforcement, is my father would talk about men and women on his beat. And he would say things like, I knew everybody on my beat and they knew me, because I knew the bar owners. He said, I know the prostitutes. I knew the second story guys, the hypes. He knew everybody, and everybody knew him. They know him on a beat as Officer Lou. That's just the way it was. And it was his beat. That was his beat. And what the thing when he would talk about stories, he was really talking about people eking out an existence, trying to make their way through life and stuff. Well, it was interspersed every now and then with, the story of a bad guy or two. But most of the stories were just about people dealing with stuff. And I often said one of the things that really dawned on me older, because my father would talk to us and tell us, he's a great storyteller. And this is a guy that we think had a 10th grade education. But one of the stories that always stuck with me was he was talking about how it's funny, things have changed, but they haven't changed. So every now and then they'd be told, hey, listen, you got to round up the prostitutes on the street and blah, blah, this, that, and the other thing. And he said we have to go and go around on the beat and say, okay, they got to, they're taking them into the local precinct. Mm-hmm. But what he would say, it was this, he goes, listen, he goes, no matter why they did what they did, why they sold their bodies, why they got to that place for that, he goes, they were women. He goes, and they should always be treated like women. And then he'd look and he'd say, you always treat people with dignity and respect. And that always stuck with me. It stuck with me about what he said about that. I didn't really, again, it was one of those things that he'd pour into us that it didn't become real, or actually, I would say it didn't produce anything till I got a little older and realized my dad cared about people. He understood that people, regardless of where they were on the economic ladder or where they were on the social ladder or where they were in terms of what they were doing, they were still human beings and they mattered. And that whole thing, when he would turn and say, always treat people, no matter who they are, with dignity and respect, we kind of never let go of those things. So those are principles that you hang on to that are part of your foundation and that impact you when you move into that arena, into law enforcement or public service. So it was a pretty cool thing. Like I said, there was nothing like on TV. It wasn't like, hey, there I was. It was about men and women that he dealt with every single day, and so it's a pretty cool thing to be poured into that way.
Is that what spurred your own interest, or what motivated you?
Well,
towards...
I'll tell you. So I'm a kid that there was 6 boys and a girl in our family, and I, our legacy in high school was most of us barely got out of high school. So we were good kids because my father and mother wouldn't put up with anything. I just tell people all the time, when in my family, my father's family came from Italy, my mom's family came from Portugal. So there was these certain expectations in our family about what manhood was all about and what honor was about. And so at about 15 years old, in my family, you're expected to be an adult. That's just the way stuff was. Mm-hmm. But we're terrible students, all of us, just terrible students. And I'm not kidding you, barely getting out of high school. And I remember trying community college right after and my father would do this. Here's what my father would say to each one of his children, like I said, 7 of us, in the beginning of their senior year, and none of us ever knew this till years later when we're sitting around talking about it, he would say, like he came up to me one day, he says, "What are you doing in 9 months?" And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing in 9 months. He goes, "I don't." And he would look at it and goes, "Well, you can't stay here. That's just a matter of," he says, "Here's the deal." He goes, you graduate high school, you get a job, you go rent at a place, you're out of here. He says, you graduate high school, you join the military, and you're out of here. Graduate high school. He says, if you start going to college, I can't pay for it. He says, but you can stay here for a little bit until you get out on your own. That's just the way it was. We go, oh, that was terrible. No, that's just the way it was, man. You just say, listen, it's time for you to go. You got to get out of the nest. Mm-hmm. And so I tried community college for a little bit, but never went, and so I came home one day, late at night. I was washing UPS trucks at night, and it was rare. He was up that night. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I said, "Dad, I can't stay here anymore. I got to get out of here." And so we sat and talked. And listen, my dad wasn't in the book I said there were no Cosby moments in our house. That's a bad thing to do now, right? Reference Cosby, but
yeah,
there was no, hey, let's sit and talk type things. My dad wasn't like that. He was a tough guy, but he wasn't like that. But when I got home late, it was early in the morning after washing UPS trucks. He just happened to be up, and I just. At 18 years old, this is so funny to look back and think, I can't be here. I got to get away. I don't want to be like some of these other people. And a few months later, it's in Navy boot camp. And so, and that's what I did. So I went, which best thing to happen. I fell in love with service life. I really did enjoy the you don't enjoy boot camp or anything, but I really did enjoy the structure and everything else. And when I got out, I stayed in the reserves and went off to college, and still a little apprehensive about what I could and couldn't do, and met my wife the first day of school. We started dating 2 weeks later, and I asked her to marry me 3 months later. So I would tell my kids, brother, when I would go, hey, listen, that's not the smartest thing to do, but we had a long engagement, and probably about halfway through my college years, I started in business, wasn't really sure. Deep down inside, though, I always had this hankering for law enforcement, and so when my wife and I got married, I transferred to another school out of Poughkeepsie, New York, Marist, and went from serving in Navy Reserves to the Air National Guard to going into the Army. When I graduated, became a military intelligence officer. But before I got commissioned, I never forget telling my dad, "Hey, Pop, I really believe that I'm being called into public service. I really believe that I'm being called into law enforcement." And I took and only as my dad could do, and being on the job for a while, you probably heard this before, but I'll never forget, he looks at me and goes, you want to be a hero? He goes, you really want to be a hero? He goes, become a fireman. He goes, everybody loves a fireman. He said, if you want people to despise you, go into law enforcement, and so we kind of never put two and two together, but it wasn't until I came on the job. But I had taken every possible test in New York. and was waiting to be called. I had applied to DEA and was upset to hear that DEA wasn't going to hire any more people, and was a stay-at-home dad for about 6 months, and then a local police department. I got called by the local Poughkeepsie City Police Department. I was supposed to start in January to the academy, but Christmas Eve, DEA called. And I actually went to the chief and said, hey, DEA called. And the chief was so good. He said, hey, you got to take it. He said, but if you fail the academy, he goes, you got a place here. So that was over 30 years ago. So we really just loved every minute. I got to be honest with you, man. We had a few moments like most of us in that line of work do that we never want to relive. And but for the most part, I've had a blessed career. But just a really, really just a blessed career with DEA. Been all over the country and been also all over the world. So wouldn't have never been able to do that. Of course, we have 6 kids and a wife, and we drug them all over the place. You know, my daughter would say, yeah, every time we had a big family meeting, it was either mom was pregnant or we were moving or both. So, but yeah, so that's how things were, and I enjoyed it. Just close to 28 years with the agency, which was just a lot of met some of the most and worked with some of the most dynamic men and women in law enforcement. I grew up in a task force environment, so a guy that taught me the most about Colombians and how to write search warrants was a sergeant from Huntington Park, California, who patrolled a 2.2 square mile area. He became like a big brother to me, and he and his family. And unfortunately, we lost him to colon cancer some years later. But it was one of the best experiences. To this day, my kids still refer to him as Uncle Bill. So, what a great walk, man! It's been a great walk.
So, when was your? So you eventually got on with the DEA. Where was your first assignment?
So I got hired on in Manhattan, and was there for about 3 or 4 months after I graduated. But I had put in for Los Angeles, and the reason people said, "What you put in for LA for?" And I said, "Well, we've been to a couple of places. I've made a very, very close friend there by the name of Steve Azam, who's now the special agent in charge of the New Orleans Field Division. And we just he was just lived across the hall from me, not across the hall, but a suite mate of mine. We became fast friends, and he would say, hey, you should put in for LA. So I called my wife, and she's always been like this. I said, hey, what would you think about going to LA? She goes, well, go wherever. And so we got sent to LA, and it was just a blast. And I was real fortunate. I was in on the tail end of the cocaine cowboy days. When we were moving, I will say this, we were moving out from that cowboy mentality and narcotics to a more professionalized look in law enforcement, including things like tactical awareness, the whole nine. There's a season in narcotics overall that you were just, everybody grew their hair long, and I did all that, who got piercings and who got this and who got that, and we started moving away from that, saying, listen, man, we need to be the professional outfit that we should be. And so I was in on the very tail end of the cowboy days, and until it really started gaining a foothold about being a professional outfit. And I was also, it was during that time, especially in LA, when the Mexicans started moving tons and tons of cocaine of the Colombians, and we came up with we started identifying that they were moving tractor trailer loads of dope across the country. And this same crew that I talked about, the state and local crew with Southeast Area Narcotics Enforcement Team that we work with almost every day. Mm-hmm. Me and our group got together, and we were tracking these trucks, and lo and behold, we wound up still to this day, it's the largest domestic drug seizure in Sylmar, California. We wound up seizing over 21 tons of cocaine and about 13 million in cash. And it kind of opened up the eyes of the United States about how much dope was actually coming in here. But more importantly, we had been screaming for years how powerful the Mexican cartels had become. And so finally, people started to listen, and the whole dynamic of DEA started changing after that as well. So just had a great career. From there, became a supervisor in Newark, New Jersey for 3 years. Went to headquarters, did about 5 years there, got promoted a couple of times. Then went to Miami, Florida, and was the deputy SAC there, one of the shortest tours for 18 months. And then I got selected to run the office here in Dallas for about 6.5 years. Just what a tremendous group of men and women. And then I got appointed to be the chief of global operations, and did that for 2 years before we just said, okay, people would say all the time, you know when it's time to go. And so my wife and family stayed here. We were not about to move back up there. And so I tried commuting every 4 to 6 weeks, which actually got to be a little bit longer. But it was a great honor to serve in that capacity, and got to meet again a lot of dynamic people across the agencies. Our partners over at the Bureau and Homeland Security and ATF, just good men and women who were trying to do the same thing for their outfits.
When you were talking about LA, what were the years in the dope? What were the years?
Oh yeah, I was in LA from '87 to '96. So it was a flood of cocaine. Most groups didn't do a case that had anything less than 3 kilos, and that sounds ridiculous to a lot of people. But it was, when I mean flooded, it was flooded. And so and we worked with every narcotics unit in Southern California. From Riverside County, LA County, LAPD, you name it, Orange County, San Bernardino, just some amazing narcotics officers, and really did a lot of great stuff. But when you look back, what happened is, this is LA. Our agency was run by predominantly East Coast people, and I'm not slighting that, but sometimes that 3-hour time difference, you try to tell people. In other words, when I was tracking, me and my partner Bill Sherman were tracking tractor trailers that we knew were being used to move dope. We'd call back to DC, and we were young, man. We were just, but both of us had less than 2 years on the job. We said, hey, we think we got something here. And you're talking to some of these senior guys. To us, they were real senior guys, and they would look at us and say, nah, you're just lucky. And so you'd hit it all. So that the whole mentality of the agency back then was different. You know what I mean? So here are all these new guys that are saying, listen, this is what's happening. And people were thinking, well, the same thing has happened for the last 20 years, and it hadn't. The dynamic of trafficking had changed. The dynamic of nations had changed and what was happening. And we were young enough and stupid enough to believe, hey, we can make a difference, man. And so yeah, that was just an awesome time.
So you're saying that it was the Mexican cartels by that point that were pushing.
Yeah, Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru were still producing most all of the cocaine. But it was what they did is, the Mexican cartels, the rise of what gave them so much power is I used to call them, they were the Teamsters for the Colombians. Uh-huh. That's what would happen. So they used their trafficking routes both in terms of moving people and marijuana. Their marijuana was still their big deal. And after we made this big hit, what started happening is they started buying into the dope, into the cocaine trade. And so now, to this day, the Mexican cartels control all of with the exception of very few, most all of dope that's here in the United States. They simply buy it from the Colombians or the Bolivians or Peruvians, and they move it into. They buy the fentanyl from Chinese organizations, and they move it into the United States. So they still control it. We put a big dent in them, but they still control it. A little concerning, though, that Colombia's production of cocaine seems to be increasing. But I think that a lot has to do with that we have not done a good job in talking with them in the past several years. I think we're going to start doing that again. But yeah, man, that was what was going on. And when we were trying to when you're trying to tell people in position of power, here's what's happening, and they're so used to, if you were on the East Coast and you weren't working heroin, you weren't working. You see, when methamphetamine came up in Southern California, people would call that kiddie dope. And by the time I got to Newark, New Jersey as a supervisor, I go, listen, meth's going to come here, and it's going to come like crazy. And people said, oh, you're nuts. And when I said, look, the Mexican cartels own that, no, you're crazy. And with a year in being in Newark, New Jersey, we're getting, meth labs both in Jersey and New York City and all the other stuff. So it's not that we were brilliant guys. We kind of saw it birth and watched it headed in that direction.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of younger guys that listen to this and don't have the closest context they have to those cocaine days is like Narcos on Netflix, which is a popular show.
By the way, both of those guys are really the real deal. Both Javier and Murph are both tremendous guys. We've known them for years, and so while Murph and Javier were down there chasing freaking, what the hell is his name? Chasing him
Pablo.
around all the, yeah. We were getting their dope that was coming up through California. And so it was funny because we'd watch an episode. My wife and I were watching the episodes, and I would text Murph. I go, because we were putting it, hey, when you guys did this, here's what was happening in L.A., back and forth. So really, I think they stuck to the story pretty well, but a lot of it is, Murph would tell you, is a lot of it is, what do they call it, entertaining license.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of BS on there, but they kind of stuck to that story. And that, in fact, did go on, the level of corruption. But I will tell you, today, the Colombian National Police travel all over the world teaching other units best practices in narcotics investigations. They're some of the most, some of the best narcotics teams at all. They still have an issue in their country. They're still dealing with narco terrorists and stuff like that. But that nation has changed so dramatically, because there became a political will to make the change, and B, the people of Colombia said, hey, enough of this, man. Enough of it. But they're still faced with a lot of challenges.
Yeah. It's interesting. I spent the weekend with a mentor of mine and Lieutenant Colonel in the Green Berets who got his first combat operations there in Colombia. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know until this weekend, actually, that he had worked down there on counter narco operations. Of course, they were there. The military was there, but I didn't realize he was there directly. And he had some interesting insights. And it's sometimes I remember growing up in that period and how pervasive it was just on the news, even once it hit, and how destructive it was. It was like meth was later on, and
well, the issue for them or anywhere else, and we see that now more and more in Central America, is corruption is the linchpin to be able to get things done, and that's the reality of it. It's not so much as this, that the level of corruption that was allowed to take hold in Colombia and Bolivia, Peru, it's unfathomable. And now you have a country like Colombia, which is a liberal democratic country that's surrounded by kind of almost left-wing states that are moving more and more to the left. So you got to contend with that. And the same thing we saw in Mexico with the level of corruption in Mexico. And I've met with the Mexican Attorney General, and I've met with the head of their national police, and it's just it's one of those things that's in epidemic proportions. Although they've gotten a little bit better, they hate to be compared to Colombia, because that's what happened in Colombia until they had the political will. And you still see the problems that we're having in Mexico relative to the violence that's there. So those are real things.
So you bounced around the country promoting as you went. Were these things that you the promotions, were they things you actively sought out?
I mean, so one of the things that when I speak a lot, I tell people, listen, I love my job. I love being an agent. I got, I was fortunate to have men and women pour into my life and professionally. My wife, I'm very, very blessed that she's the kind of woman that just absolutely believed that it was my calling. So, and she's the kind of lady that pulls me back when my head was getting too big and I thought who the hell I was. So I recognize that, but I really did enjoy it. And then when it was time to move up, I was always looking for the next challenge. And it always surprised me when I talk to guys who went, I don't want to be a supervisor, I want to be a supervisor. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are guys that say that because they think it's cool. That's cool. Hey, listen, man, there's nothing wrong with promoting. There's nothing wrong with. We need good leaders. But the issue becomes is I always ask groups is why? Why do you want to promote? And so because you get people looking at you like a chicken looking at a card trick because they don't know sometimes how to answer. Listen, it's okay to want to promote because you want the next challenge. That's a great thing. It's okay to want to promote because say, hey, there's a little bit more money in it for me. But if you want to promote because, hey, I want to be in a position of power and I want to be the guy or the gal, you're already starting off on a bad footing. And we run into men and women who are like that. They promote, even at the first line. I got to promote, and the next thing they think they're taller, smarter, and better looking than everybody else. And I used to bother me. Go, how did you get like that? Why would you think like that? Why would you think like that? And for the most part, what you find out is they had mentors that were similar to that. Okay, once you're in control, once you're the boss, you're the smartest guy in the room. And what I would tell people all the time, you're not. You learn how to leverage those smart men and women that are around you. And so there's a lot of those. So you start realizing, and it's one of the reasons I would write. So I would be in a group, or I would go somewhere and I would see something that, man, I like the way that guy or that gal handled that. And I had a habit of just writing stuff down, just writing 1 or 2 lines. And or I would run into, like many of us have run into, people who had no right to lead, just were dangerous, especially in this line of work. And you'd look at it and go, what in the hell are they thinking? And so I'd write stuff down. So as I promoted up the ranks, I used to tell my wife all the time, I'd like to write a book someday. And I never knew what. So as I'm finishing so let me just go back a little bit. What started happening is when I was promoted as an executive in 2002, I started just on my own, men and women who I had the honor of serving with and who wanted to promote. I would grab a hold and just sit with them. We didn't do things like that in DEA typically. Actually, the guys and gals who were relatively good leaders did. And I'd say, hey, listen, or you'd find somebody and say, listen, you really should consider promoting. Or when you'd have guys and gals say, hey, I'd really like to promote, you'd sit with them and ask them those questions and talk to them about, hey, the whole idea of promoting, the whole idea of becoming a boss isn't about being the smartest guy in the room. It's about taking care of men and women who are entrusted to you. And so I would talk to these guys and gals about that, and I would ask them the why, the hard questions. And I would tell them, if you're gonna move into a leadership position, if that's what you want to do. And by the way, leadership is not the sole boundary of people with stripes. Leadership has to do with all of us. As we influence other people in our lives. But traditionally, when we think about leadership, we think about stripes with stars or moving up the ranks. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to lead, if you really want to lead people, and there's so many BS sayings out there. Managers do things right, leaders do things. I'm like, that's all platitudes, man. Here's the deal. If you want to be an effective leader, if you want to make a difference in your own walk, and you want to make a difference, more importantly, in the lives of others and in your organizations, you have to learn how to care about people. You have to, and I would say this, and I'm a pretty big guy, you got to learn how to fall in love with men and women who are entrusted to you. And so that started this thing where I would constantly, or at least in my sphere of influence, talk to men and women about. And the next thing you know, I was being asked to go down to Quantico to talk to groups that were coming in from the outside. Some of them were lieutenants, and some of them were more than that. Next thing you know, I'm speaking on our side to the National Academy classes that would come over and do a couple of weeks of narcotics. And just being honest about leadership. Most of our men and women, you think about it, even in your own walk, most of our men and women are technically competent. In other words, they know their job.
Right.
They really do. They know listen, most of them, there's a few shoe salesmen out there, but most people in our career fields, regardless, you find out most of them are technically competent. Now, they're all on different levels on the ladder, as far as a work ethic or what they're content with, but most of them are technically competent. And what you want to do is, my thing is telling people about what it takes to lead men and women is that they got to know that you care about them. And it's not, man, brother, I've had guys, everybody gets a hug? No, everything is bathed in accountability, right? Everything is bathed in accountability. But you got to be willing unconditionally to care about men and women. And it's not about you. As I tell people all the time, a good leader, he's not the beneficiary of good leadership. His people are. That's what it is. And if his people are, then his organization is going to get better. And that's what I started speaking, and I called it the heart of leading. You have, hey, it's leadership at the front line. It's the heart thing, man. You gotta, enough of this stuff about, you gotta be like Patton. I'm like, what the hell out of here, man. What you gotta do is make sure your men and women, A, that you care about them, B, that they're technically proficient at their job, and B, you care about them both professionally and personally. And here's where I started siding with people. People started siding with me. I don't care what they do off I don't care what they do off duty. I said, you're crazy. I said, you're nuts. You got to get to know people. You should care about what's going on. You should care if he's getting a divorce. You should care if there's a sickness in his family. You should care if he just doesn't feel like he's getting support from the department. You should care about those things, because we only have X amount of breaths here.
So what do you say? on that topic, what do you say to the people who feel like they need to be distant from the people that they lead?
Well, I'll tell you, if I tell people all the time, here's why some people never make it to being a great leader. And I'm not talking about, oh my God, we worship and everything. I mean, with their own ranks is because A, their ego doesn't allow them because they think, oh, I got to be smarter and better than everybody else. B, they think they got to keep people at a distance and off balance. I actually had a guy tell me that, another executive tell me that. He goes, here's the best thing you do is you keep people at a distance and off balance. And so my key is, hey, the issue for leadership is to have relationships with people. You know, human beings are designed, are born to be relational. And so if you want to make a difference in people's life, you got to learn how to have a relationship. By the way, that doesn't mean, well, you know, I've heard this too, familiarity breeds contempt. If you let it, you know, if you let that happen. Young man, after I talked to a group for about a couple of hours and everything, he sent me an email. I was the chief of domestic operations back then, and he said, hey, boss, he said, could you be friends? He's going to be a first-line supervisor. Can you be friends with your group? And I thought about it, I sent them back. I said, absolutely, you should be. But the difference is a real friend, you have to be their leader first. Because sometimes friends will lie to friends because they don't want to hurt their feelings. But we have to have people that are accountable to us, accountable to our organization, and accountable to the men and women that we serve in the public. And so you've got to be willing to look at that guy. Who's your friend? Who you go to choir practice with? Who you get to know their family with? Not just when they're not holding up their own. You know, you want to praise them, all the other stuff. But if you got to be able to look at them and say, hey, man, I expected you should be doing better. Hey, man, what's going on here? Hey, you see what I mean? Everything is bathed in accountability. So this whole notion, oh, you can't be people's friends. The hell you can't. You have to be their leader first. And so this whole idea, listen, talk to any combat platoon sergeant out there. I was fortunate that my military service pales in comparison to many today. Even my own son, who by the grace of God survived 3 combat tours. And they'll tell you right away, the men and women that they're on the lines with, trying to keep from getting killed left and right, they love these guys. They with that kind of brotherly love that is just an amazing thing. What do you mean that doesn't translate into the things that we do? That's not goofy. That's not weak. And then that's a problem. We have this twisted sense that this kind of leadership is weak. It is not weak, man. It is not weak. People to see who you are. How many bosses have you run into who just, you know, they don't want to get to know you. I'm not interested. Here, do your job. Do this, that, the other thing. Compared to a leader that brings you and says, man, how you doing? I heard you just had a wife, had a baby. And those things are difficult. And let me tell you something right now, brother. You pay a price to be that kind of good leader. You pay a price to be a leader who believes he should serve people. Mm-hmm. And I think the whole servant leadership gig has gotten such a bad name because people think, that's weak. It's this, that, and that. No, it's not. You're never the beneficiary. The men and women who are entrusted to you are the beneficiary of good leadership.
You know, I was having this discussion with a group of other sergeants this week about, can you be friends? Can you be friends with people you lead? And some were saying yes, some were saying absolutely not. And I took a different approach, and I value your input on this. But I equated it to a parent-child relationship in that I love them. I very much care for them. I want to have positive relations with them. But my first obligation is to guide them and provide for them, not to be their friend, right? I mean, I got 2 young kids. My goal isn't to be their friend; it's to be their mentor.
Right. Here's what I would tell you right from the get-go.
Yeah.
Be careful about equating your men and women as children.
Yeah. They got to be careful with that.
And I say that because we have a tendency sometimes. I listen to a head of an agency refer to her people as her babies.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Listen, I'm not your freaking baby. I got issues. I got mortgages. I got everything else like that.
Yeah.
So I know what you're saying. Mm-hmm. I know what you're saying. I call it pouring into people. Mm-hmm. So our job, whether I'm on the first line, second line, third line, is to pour into these people, to pour into them. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about friendship, we need to think, oh, the guy that's coming over your house every night and everything. Well, we used to have, for my crew when I was a first line, that's what I did. I had the most kids, so every once a quarter or maybe a little longer, depending on the weather, we'd say, hey, get together, bring your wife, bring your kids, bring everybody over. We're going to throw some meat on the grill and get to know people, get to know your families. Mm-hmm. It creates that kind of unit cohesiveness that that you want. And so so if somebody said, were they your friends? You said, damn right they were my friends. But they were also men and women that tomorrow we got to go out into the arena again. Right. So that I want to make sure that not only not only from a professional standpoint that they're ready for fight, that at a personal standpoint, and this is where people will go, wait a minute, is I want them not only to succeed, it was in my heart to want them to succeed professionally, but I want them to succeed personally. I don't want them to fail personally. There's already too much stuff. That's what people are like, I don't care about what they do off duty. I don't care what happens in their personal life. As a dude, if they're broke at home, they're going to be broke here. And so we should be pouring into them. There should be some kind of example. I mean, life happens. People get divorced and everything. But we don't have to. I would tell people all the time. What will you settle for? How much will you put up with at work regarding when you hear certain things? Like I talk about what moral leadership is about, and that scares the hell out of people. You bring up the question of morality anymore, people, oh, here we go. People get scared. But I say, how much will you put up with? You know, how much are you willing to put up with? You know, when guys are talking about in your crew that they're going to go to the local nudie club and they're going to do this, that, and the other thing, and they're all married and have kids, how much are you willing to put up with? And I tell people all the time, I tell guys all, hey, listen, I don't want to hear that crap. Don't bring that crap that's a cancer, man. Don't bring it in here. And I've had people say, you can't tell people that. Because you damn well I can tell them. See, because I know him. I know his family. I know his children. We get together, we burn meat on the grill. And now he's out bragging about he's going to do ABC. See, he's headed towards the cliff at 90 miles an hour, and nobody's willing to get in front of him saying, dude, I don't want you to go over the cliff, and that's where you're headed. So, you know, that scares the hell out of people to be that kind of leader. But that's part of it, man. You want to be a real friend? You want to be a real friend? That's what I'm talking about. Look at somebody in the eye and say, you are getting ready to crash and burn, and we can't have that. I can't have you go there. Mm-hmm. And most of the time when you're able, if you have the moral courage to do that, and I'll tell you a story about not having the moral courage. When you have the moral courage to do that, it's a wake-up call for them to say, what am I doing? You know, what the hell am I doing? And those who still continue to drive towards the cliff, you keep throwing up those flags. And the problem is sometimes, you know, you go in the morning and you see them burning at the bottom of the cliff, and now you got to do something.
Yeah, tell us. I love stories, but tell us one about an example of that.
So when and it really kind of follows suit when you talk about friends and everything else like that. So I made it kind of a regular thing in my first supervisory group, and I was really blessed because I walked into this. It was a tiny group. I was used to working in Southern California where you called up a narcotics team and you got 15 freaking seasoned narcs, a dope dog, and a helicopter. Everywhere you turned, that's what you had. And then I get it to Newark, New Jersey. I get in there to my first group, and I have like 6 people. And I'm like, I told the ASAC, hey, this is not a group. This is not even a squad. He goes, deal with it. Well, you know, welcome to Jersey. So anyway, you know, we realized that the guys and gals, they're hardworking, scrappy narcotics guys. You know, we weren't bringing home, you know, the Colombian cartels or anything, but really these guys are hardworking, love their jobs. And so kind of as regularly as we could, and I'm not talking about once a week, I'd have everybody over the house, and you know, because like I said, I was the one with the most kids, or if somebody was going to host it, we'd make sure we'd be there. You get to know the wives, you get to know the kids, and it was great. And it really did. I mean, I love these guys. Good. And they were all on different levels, man. They're all good guys. Some were, you know, some guys you had to tell to go home. You know, other guys you had to say, dude, come on, man. You haven't done anything in 2 weeks. So, but that's the kind of relationship I had with them. But I'm coming to the office early one morning, and I'm sitting there doing whatever the hell you have to do, and administrative work or whatever. And I hear the guys coming in. I hear them chuckling and laughing and stuff. And again, just a great, great group. Then I hear one of the guys start talking about, and I stop and go, he didn't just say what I thought he said. And I start hearing him talking about a club, and I start hearing him talking about a dancer and how well endowed, and I'm going, my stomach's just getting in a knot because I know this guy. See, I know this guy. I mean, he's been to my house. His family's been to my house, and we know his kids. And he's talking, and the guys are laughing and all this other stuff. And I have to. Now I'm the guy who's been going around telling people, hey man, you got to get into you got to keep people from going over a cliff. You got to have the moral courage to step in sometimes, pay a price for that. To say, dude, what are you doing? What are you thinking? And I talked myself out of it. Not saying anything with the thing. My idea was, okay, if he wants to ruin his life, he can ruin his life. And everything in me was screaming, you're a coward, Capra. Well, why won't you? Why won't you? And I remember it took a couple of months later when I heard the same thing happen. And I had to contend with this years later. And I'm not trying to be a humble Harry, man. Listen, I've been very blessed on the job. I've made enough mistakes, and I'm a chucklehead sometimes. But I really, really let fear steer at the time. Well, because really, if I go grab this guy, what'll the rest of the guys think? You get into that, even as a leader. Well, you want them to think you're a tough, hardworking guy, but this guy he's headed towards the cliff, and I'm keeping my mouth shut because I didn't have the moral courage to say anything until about 4 months later when some kind of conversation came up again. I pulled him in and said, "Don't you bring that cancer in my office." And he was shocked because he didn't realize I would talk about my family, how important my family is. I would talk about how important my faith is. And I did that for a lot of reasons. First of all, you guys got to know where I stand on almost everything. This is what I'm about. Here's what you're going to know. And I'm going to do everything I can not to lose my family because I love my job so much. So I talk about family a lot and talk about our responsibility and our balance to our families a lot. And I bring this guy in, and I finally said, and it was a little frightening first do, but I said, if I don't say something, we know what's going to happen. And so I did. I let him have him with both barrels in terms of, listen, man, I know you've been. You bring this stuff in here. This is not a locker room, and I don't know what else that I said. A couple other things that I said, and he was mortified because we're close. He was mortified because I think it finally dawned on him, whoa, this is not a game here. And fast forward, I would wind up getting transferred, 6-7 months later and everything. Well, but by the grace of God, he didn't lose his family, and every now and then, probably once or twice a year, I get an email from him, and he it's funny because he'll sign it to prodigal. He'll say, "Hey, this is his family's doing well," and I've been listen. Here's why I tell that story, because I go, what kind of leader do you want to be? I mean, is it just important that we get for dope? For dope cops, we just get the dope and the money, and I don't care, go live your life. Or is the reality of what I talk about is we have a moral responsibility that we can take men and women where they can't get to by themselves, and sometimes that becomes tough love. That's why a real friend would look at somebody and say, "Man, you're failing. You got an engine out, you're spinning in. I don't want you to spin in." And that's a tough thing to do, because you pay a price to be that kind of guy. Because there are guys that look at you and tell you to go. Go somewhere. Don't you have no reason to be in my business. Well, actually, I do. I do have a reason, because I don't want you to fail. I do have a reason because you're going to be broke, and then you're going to come here broke. So I do have a reason. And here's what I tell people. Listen, we deal with people every day. I believe that they have just like the organization, they have a purpose. The organization has a purpose, and our people have a purpose in the organization, but they also have a moral purpose in life. And leaders should lead them with a level of passion to take them to a place where they can't get to by themselves. That's what we should be doing. That's where we should be investing time. That's where we take risks and pouring into people. Mm-hmm. We pour into them every day. So I'm not talking about up with people. Everybody gets isn't it great? We're all going to go out. I'm not the birthday guy, I know some guys who decided and gals, we're going to be the birthday boss. Hey, everybody gets a birthday. I can't remember my 6 kids' birthdays. I'm not going to remember theirs. But I would tell people all the time, I want to know if somebody's hurting. I want to know, if somebody had a kid. I want to know if somebody's having a tough time in their marriage. I want to know these things. Is there some way we can mitigate that? A lot of times there's not. Mm-hmm. There's not. But what's our responsibility? I tell people all the time, what's our responsibility? What's our responsibility to men and women? And everything, if you read, and I have this extensive library like a lot of guys do. It's amazing to me that even the researchers who've researched companies that have done exceedingly well, without a doubt, every company, every major CEO that has brought their company to the next level when they've been interviewed, especially I love guys like Jim Collins, Kunz's and stuff. Their research always comes back to when you talk to these CEOs or you talk to these leaders, they go, these guys cared about people. They cared about these men and women. Yeah, they also, listen, they were also smart. They also knew where their organization where it's going. They also knew the market. They knew all those things. But what was more important to them was their people and what they did. They reminded people about what we were here about, why we do the things that we do.
So to me, it seems like, for me, what I've learned and am learning, it's constant, is that
it is, yeah.
in order to lead other people, you have to have a pretty good basis of self-awareness, right? You can't direct others if you don't know where you're coming from, or you can't give guidance or be a beacon of light to follow me if you don't know where you are on that path. What are there things you did or that you used to enhance and develop your own self-awareness?
Yeah, I think it's important for all. First of all, you said it earlier. You never stop learning. This is the one thing about a journey, especially a leadership journey. No one ever is self-actualized. And those men and women who write books and then said they are full of crap. Mm-hmm. I tell people all the time I have the spiritual gift of criticism when it comes to reading authors, because first thing I do is I'll turn the book over and I read about some guy who went from high school to college to graduate school. He worked for a Fortune 500 company, and now he's running around the country getting paid $25,000 an hour. So he tells you how to be leading people. I'm like, this is BS. What's his war wounds? What arena did he serve in? What's his experience? What's his credibility? And that's Jimmy Capra's issue with most people who go around leading people. So what's your damn credibility? And not like researchers who research and everything, but even to the extent there's a guy that's real popular who's running around. He wrote a couple of books. He's never led or managed anybody, but he's getting paid tons of money to do it. God bless him. Somebody says, Jim, you're jealous. I went, yeah, maybe I am. so because I wasn't that smart. But yeah, I think you have to be responsible for your own walk. And what does that mean? What does that mean? I think you got to be willing to be a little self-reflective, and you have to. I think what's more important, and this is where we get a little scared as leaders. We have to be willing to be vulnerable, and we don't like being vulnerable. And what I mean vulnerable with our people, giving them the opportunity to, to say, hey, boss, I disagree with something. I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about disrespect. You said, what are you constantly doing? You're constantly self-evaluating. And here I'll put it this way. Mm-hmm. I learned a long time ago one of my biggest issues in leading men and women is I have to be careful that I'm listening 100%. See what I mean? I am listening, because if you and I are talking, and a lot of times, especially if we're deep into a subject or there's an issue, what typically happens is, as you're speaking to me, I'm starting to prepare in my mind what I'm going to say next.
Right.
And what that does is I start shutting you out, and I don't hear the rest of what you're saying. And here's what I'll tell you. And it takes a little guts to do it, but I'm a chucklehead, so I'm going to tell you this story real quick. So I'm sitting there, and one of my ASACs is a great guy. He sits down in front of me, and he's telling me about an issue that he had with a lieutenant from another PD that was doing I forget what it was, controlled delivery or something. And, and as he's telling me this, I'm starting to do a slow burn, because I'm going, God, what the heck, and he's literally, while he's talking to me, what I didn't know is he's already told me what the issue was, what the problem was, how he resolved it, and how he was able to patch things up with the department and everything else, right? Mm-hmm. But Jimmy Capra's sitting there halfway through, and I'm thinking, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this. And so when he was done, I realized, which is hard for me to do, man, because nobody wants to be a coward. And I realized I haven't heard the last 3 minutes of what this guy, and he's was a talented guy, mm-hmm. what he said. I said, now what do I do? And so I literally looked him in the eye, and I did this for two reasons. One of the hardest things I did for myself, because it really is. Because I'm like everybody else. You don't like to look in the mirror and say, man, I see all the mistakes that you make. I see your blemishes. But I said, hey, Jimmy, can I ask you to do something for me? And he's looking at me with his head cocked. I says, can you tell me that again? Can you go over that with me one more time? And he's looking at me. Now, again, he works for me. He's my friend. I know him. He's got groups of other guys. I said, Jim, I got to apologize to you. I said, I'm getting so worked up inside. I'm trying to think, man, and I missed everything you said in the last 2 minutes. And we just started laughing. But here's why I tell the story. Because of that, I started becoming more aware of that. Now, I'm not saying I cured myself. I'd like to tell you I did. But I became more aware of, hey, dummy, listen. And then before you open your mouth, listen, get everything down. So that's what I think the older or the more mature you get on the job, and that's not an insult, and more mature you get, not just on the job, but as a leader, you'd say, okay, before I get all fired up, let me listen to this, let me hear what they have to say, let me respond accordingly, let me be careful that, because I'm a guy that takes me a lot to get excited about things. My problem is always when I get excited, I kick the hell out of the cooler. And that's I don't. I've gotten better. I really did over the years. I've gotten better about it, but I had to realize that too. Is hey man, let's kind of tone down the whole emotion thing. So, yeah, I think we're responsible for that walk. I think we're responsible for, and this is a tough thing, man, for allowing those men and women who are entrusted to us to also pour back into us. Let me give you this if we got time. So when I took over the command here in Dallas already had a great reputation for years. I was fortunate because I knew all the leaders here in Dallas at that level. And they were all, by their own right, phenomenal men and women. And so, but one of the things that I learned early on is we sat together, and some of these guys had been my friends for years, and now we're working together. I said, listen, I gotta say this one thing. If every one of you agree with me on everything I say, one of us isn't needed. So I said, if you all agree with on everything I say, one of us isn't needed. That's not what I'm looking for. I kind of know the guy in the mirror. I got to a point where I know that guy in the mirror. I'm pretty good at most of the things that we're able to do, but I ain't got all the answers. So if I can't leverage you guys' expertise and experience, I'm never going to move this place to where we want to move it, which is where. And I would point, wherever I was pointing, I would say, that's north. That's where we're going. That's where we want to take these men and women to. Our pursuit should be in excellence. That means you cannot be fearful of saying, if I want to go in a certain direction or something comes up, that you can say, hey, did you consider A, B, and C? And here's what I mean by that. So what I did on my own is when there were big, major things that we had to do, whether they were operational, whether they were this human resource stuff, get these smart people together, and I would say, here's what's going on, here's the issue, here's what I would like to do, this is what I'm considering. And then guys and gals on the staff would say, hey, ABC, the quietest guy was the smartest guy in the room. He never wanted to know anybody was. He didn't want us to know how smart he is, but we wound up, Skip would always, people would talk back and forth. We enjoyed each other. But Skip, after a while, would just say, hey, did you think about this when we're trying to resolve an issue? Did you think about this? And all of us would look at him and go, damn, man, that was awesome. That was freaking great. But that doesn't mean in the heat of things, when things are happening in the middle of a battle in the arena, that when I go, hey, we're doing this, they didn't go, well, now we're going to talk about it, because there are times you don't have that. You got to execute. But in the larger thing of leading and managing men and women, you have to leverage that expertise of those other people who, you're pouring into them, but they also pour into you. You're always learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Learning is a good transition to one of my last questions here is, you had an event. It was probably like 4 years ago, I think, maybe longer now, and it kind of went viral in a little way. But it was your opportunity to speak at a Senate hearing, and a very impassioned testimony. And I'll put a link in the show notes for people who want to watch the whole. Well, it's edited, but the whole piece. But my question was, by this point, you're the chief of operations for the DEA.
Right.
You've moved through these career paths, and I want to talk. I want to ask about imposter syndrome.
Right.
And if you're familiar with that term, and the idea that, I'm envisioning the challenge or the opportunity to now you're chief of operations, and you're now going to go testify in front of the Senate. And what's that experience like? What was that experience like on a personal level? Yeah,
we had just so the Senate hearing, and then I did a House hearing after that, was on what we were doing in Afghanistan. And at the time, we had 100 of our guys in Afghanistan. But I always look forward to it, because I always thought what a high honor it was. You testify in the friggin' Senate or the House. That's pretty cool, but it's also a butcher shop. It's also there are legislators who don't like what we do. There are legislators that are legalizers, on and on and on. But I happened to be testifying in front of Senator Grassley and Senator Feinstein, and we knew a question was going to come out about legalization. Now, mind you, again, the hearing is supposed to be about Afghanistan. And so Senator Grassley, the only way he could do it, he said, you're the senior career guy in DEA, this, that, and the other thing. He goes, what is your opinion? I forget how he put it, about this, because he's going after the Obama administration about, the recreational drug legalization or something like that. Now, A great story would be, brother, for me to say absolutely ridiculous, but in my head I'm thinking, okay, you in that moment, there's a pre-approved script and that the Department of Justice signs off on.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a response, is a departmental response to that if they ask, which is, well, we have this thing that's set up by Deputy Attorney General Cole and blah, 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 this, that, and the other thing. And so as fast as the mind can think, I'm thinking about this and I'm arguing with myself, says, you gotta be honest, man. You gotta, first of all, not just for our own people, but what my dad's been long gone, but what would my dad say if I gave the bureaucratic response to what I know to be a huge problem in our country and it's going to get worse? And so it took everything inside me, because if you first watch the testimony, you'll see me dance a little.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see me say, well, this, that, and that Cole memo, and then you'll see me pause for a second, and that pause is that, hey, dude, stop it. You either gonna, kind of goes back to moral courage. And again, I'm not trying to say, oh, wasn't it wonderful? What I'm trying to be the reality of thinking, my career can be over. And I'm not just saying, and now I was safe. I knew that I could retire. I could walk in if they. And so when I said going down the path of drug legalization in our country is reckless and irresponsible, the department went absolutely crazy. They went nuts. As a matter of fact, there's always a department representative in the galley with us, and who's sitting next to my deputy chief, and she kept telling him, he can't say that. He can't say that. He's not supposed to say that. And so. You'd have thought I'd beat up Mother Teresa if she was still alive. But to Senator Feinstein, who I don't necessarily agree with on many, many issues, I think people miss this, is Grassley, we knew what Grassley's stand as a Republican, but Feinstein did say, I never believed it should be legalized, but she always believed it should be for medicinal purposes. Fast forward, when I left there, about a week later, I got called over to the department. It's never happened before, because I'm getting ready for another testimony. And during this meeting where they were supposed to reprogram me, and I say that jokingly, about what to do, I'm the guy that lost his mind in the meeting. I'm the guy that said it's bullshit. I'm the guy that looked at the presidential appointed legislative affairs guy and told him that the president's not the expert, nor is the attorney general on this. I am, and they're not listening to us. And I didn't say that to be big-headed or anything, but I figured I'm in. But I did. I said, Attorney General's not the expert. Neither is the president regarding that. We see this every day. Men and women who are patrolling streets in places like Washington and Colorado, they see the issue. We see the issue in places where it's illegal, and you're telling us that this is okay. I'm not doing it. Matter of fact, I think my comment was, I'm not doing your dance. I said, this is going to come back. And I told Feinstein this as well. I said, you're gonna come back 5-6 years from now, and you're gonna ask, how the hell did we get here when drug use and abuse skyrockets? And listen, brother, where we are right now, we lost 67,000 people to overdose deaths, and then we're finding more and more ties to marijuana. But we don't want to talk about that. Oh my gosh, we don't want to talk. So it took a level of to do that. Fortunately for me, my administrator was very, very supportive. When I went back, although she did get a call, I would find out about a month before I retired. She kept getting a call. I walked in one day and I looked at her and said, hey, is everything okay? She goes, they keep telling me how you embarrassed the president, how you embarrassed the attorney general during your testimony. And I thought for a minute, I went, that's BS. I told the truth. You tell the truth about things. So yeah, it was quite it was quite the thing. But I think we're either going to be men and women of integrity, especially in our walk. One of the things I would tell people all the time is, you talk to any patrolman about marijuana drug use, what's going on. You talk to anybody working the street when they're pushing a radio car. You talk to them about what they see. That'll be proof anywhere, And I just still hold to that. And the important thing is, just like leadership, is what is it that we want to do? What kind of legacy do we want to leave in our country? I say the same thing about organizations to leaders: is how do you want to leave here? Don't you want to leave it a little bit better? Don't you think you have a moral responsibility to leave the organization a little bit better off than we were given to? And I think that's important.
So thank you for sharing that. It's very interesting to see the backside of that, because just watching it. Just watching the video, the pressure must have been intense, because you can almost feel it through the screen when you're watching it.
Yeah, it is, and I start getting a little animated. I had to catch myself and try to calm down because, it's, we deal with in our line of work, and I keep saying our line of work, even though I've been retired. I told that to group to an NYPD guys the other day. I says, you got to forgive me. I keep saying ours, even though I'm retired, but it'll always be ours. We deal with evidence every day, and that kind of evidence has to withstand judicial scrutiny. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of stuff we always have to go, hey, listen, I'm telling you, the evidence points to this. Because there's so much BS out there, and so we have to be willing to stand up and go, you're wrong, and here's why, and I have evidence to prove that. And we have to be men and women of integrity, not just men and women, but our organizations. People have looked at our organizations and say, yeah, they're holding that ground. They're holding that, not just that it should be the moral high ground and the high ground overall.
Certainly. So before we wrap up and I tell everybody where to find out more about you, a question I like to ask all of our guests is, if you could teach every cop in the country one thing, just one thing, what would it be?
You know what I would tell? Here's what I would tell them. I would tell them the thing that I told my daughter and my son, who went into law enforcement. I would tell them always never lose your compassion for what you're doing. Never be so scarred about the things that we see that you lose your compassion for humanity, because we see so much bad stuff every day. I mean, we're almost to the point now we celebrate PTSD and all the other stuff. I know that's a terrible thing to say, but we listen. Try never ever to lose your compassion. My daughter, one of the highest honors I had was to pin her badge on. She became an Arlington police officer, then became a detective, and anyway. So as I'm walking down after my wife and I are walking down, getting ready to pin her badge on, and this is what I did because I'm a wuss the older I get. I said, I have to try to talk to you not as your dad right now. Okay, if I can get through this, let me talk to you as a fellow warrior who stands the line with you. I said, you're going to see the most heinous things that human beings do to each other. The rest of society doesn't want us to do. I said, you've got to love them anyway. I said, people are going to lie about just because of what you represent. They're going to lie about you. They're going to say bad things about you. I said, you got to love them anyway. I said, you're going to get a reputation, not just within your department and the community, but amongst the bad guys too, about who you are, what type of person you are. You don't lie or cheat or steal for anybody. And I said, I'm going to tell you something. In your own department, you're going to have some senior people walk up to you and tell you, they're going to say, hey kid, you're not here to solve all the problems of the world. You're not here. I'm telling you, not as your father, but as a fellow warrior, you are here to solve the problems of the world. The difference is you do it one call at a time. One call at a time. One call at a time. That's how you do it. Never lose that burning, those coals that burn in you. Never forget why you were called into this profession. Never forget that you were pulled into this thing, that you found that this is what. Never forget that part of your job is to love those people out there. It doesn't mean a quiver in your liver, but to really care about those men and women that you're going to serve every day. And that's difficult because you're not going to like some of them. That's difficult. That's what sets us apart as public servants and warriors. And remember that young woman, as I told my daughter, in the mirror. Remember when you stood in the mirror with the first time you were put your Sam Brown nightstick, your badge on. Because I remember when I got my stuff from Poughkeepsie City, stand in front of the mirror and think how I'm going to solve the problems of the world. I never forgot that. Don't ever forget that. You just do it one call at a time. I said in my nearly 30 years, I've tried to do it one case at a time, and not lose my compassion. That's what I would tell everybody.
I think that's great advice and really inspiring. James, thanks for being with us. The book is Leadership at the Front Line.
Yeah.
I want to give a real quick second. You've got a new book coming out. Tell us about that one.
Actually, we did 3 books. Leadership at the Front Line, Lessons Learned About Loving, Leading, and Legacy. It's my walk in DEA. It's 11 chapters. Somebody says, hey, how come it's only 11 chapters? I said, that's because it's all I had to write about. My second book was The Eagle and Seagulls. It's a story I made up for my kids over 30-something years ago about being set apart, not being a follower, and how to face storms in your life. The third book was born out of my son, who was a police officer here in Texas a few years ago, said, hey, Dad, what the hell is wrong with my generation? And my wife and I got together and said, why don't we write about our journey? And that's the joy and the challenges of raising 6 kids in a culture that necessarily doesn't adhere to any kind of standards. And so my wife and I, who she's co-authored with me, wrote our story about having 6 kids and the challenges we had. Some of the kids had more adversity than others. They all had their own, and we had each of them that we wrote about. We asked permission to write about them and shared with them, and it's doing really, really well. And the book is kind of this hope thing that you can still make a difference in your children's lives, despite the fact that there's such moral relativism out there in our culture, despite the fact that we don't seem to have we're in a moral free fall, but you can still raise kids of hope and promise that make a difference in their own walk.
And where can people find that book and find out more about you?
It's actually, you can find it at Barnes & Noble. It's on Amazon. All 3 of them are on Amazon. They can go to our website, which is frontlineleadershipgroup.com, and it's you'll see on the books page we have actually the introduction to our 3rd book. You can download that on there to get a primer of what we write about, and then what I do now and I have done since I retired is I did a lot of things differently than other guys, and I've been going around the country speaking and teaching on having a heart to lead at the front line and talk about how to lead and develop leaders across generational boundaries, and it's just been a blast. We've been really blessed and fortunate, and like I tell people, I've got a lot of words, so I got to be careful.
James, thanks for being with us. I'll put links in the show notes for all of those books and how to find you at frontlineleadershipgroup.com in case people are driving and can't find it right now. They just go to thesquadroom.net to get all of that.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on the show, brother. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for listening to The Squad Room. If you like what you heard today, if you got something out of this conversation, please share it with somebody. Grab their phone, hit subscribe for them, and tell them about this show. Send them a link to the website. Do something to get this information in front of them. This idea that leaders need to care about their people and love them we need to make that grow. And I think that we will have a much more successful profession if we can do that. If we can get over the machismo and the in it for themselves kind of attitude that we sometimes have to encounter. Also, please leave a review on iTunes if you can. That helps us spread the word of the show. We have a mailing list. Stuff is going out on the mailing list. To keep up to date, you can text The Squad Room, all one word, to 44222 to get signed up for our mailing list directly from your phone. And also, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Squad Room to find out when new episodes are up. And, of course, that Facebook group again, so check that out. All right, until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.